Hey guys, it's been a while since we've talked. I did my book over the time machine and I looked into many different aspects of this book. First of all, I looked into different kinds of relationships between man versus either society. I did man versus man, man versus nature. Then I did some different aspects over the author and I made sure to include some history over the Victorian era. So, first of all, I did my book over the time machine by H.G. Wells. I went over many different aspects of this book. I talked about different relationships, imagery. I also talked about symbolism. While reading the book, I noticed the time machine was almost explained to be a vehicle to help the reader see issues of his time. He lived in a time called the Victorian era, which was from 1835 to 1901, and this is the time where it was socialism was a big issue of this time, and the scientist was extremely interested in the theory of evolution, as known as Darwin's theory of evolution. Within this topic, H.G. Wells was into the future. Within this book, H.G. Wells was into the future. He was all the way to 802,701, which is pretty far into the future. And he discovers that the human has split into two separate species, the Eloi and the Morlocks. So the Eloi were living above ground, and they were childlike, I guess I would say, and the Morlocks were evil. They were looked like sloths almost, and the Morlocks hated the light, and the Eloi seemed they so I explain this as the Eloi and the Morlocks were two separate classes. The Eloi seemed like a classless society. Money was not an issue. There was no poor or there was no wealthy. The Eloi, they had no outlook on society. There was no poor or there was no wealthy, and they performed needless acts for one another. And the Morlocks are more of savages, and they steal things, like they stole the time machine in the book. So I basically, from the Victorian era, so while reading this book, I took the Victorian era and turned it into 802,701, and I looked at these two different times, which is a big difference. But from what I got from the book, it was mainly about the class. H.G. Wells was trying to explain how the class of the Victorian era will change into the future. So I put from the Victorian era, where class is tremendous. Class is everything. And people are distinguished between either the poor or the wealthy. In the year 802,701, the battle between the classes went so far that the separation between the poor and the wealthy becomes so extreme that they evolve into two separate species, aka the Eloi and the Morlocks. In some ways, the time machine can be seen as an escape from industrialization, and the battle between the rich and the poor was horrible in the Victorian era. The rich flourished, and they could escape all their problems. They could ride out into the country on a horse and a carriage, or they could just go out into the country and enjoy their time, maybe go to the local theater and enjoy it. Now the poor, they could not escape any of their problems. The poor had no way to escape their problems. And I came up with the question, maybe H.G. Wells used the time machine as a means to escape the life at his time. So H.G. Wells was a scientist, and he maybe used this book to escape the ways of his time and the way that he was raised and treated.